My first question will be that where you were born, what was your academics, who the important people were to you in your private life and in your professional life?
All right, so actually I was born in La Chaux-de-Fonds in Switzerland, and La Chaux-de-Fonds is actually a town which is the highest city in Europe at 1,000 meters. And this factual reality influenced me because as a child, we still have to go to school by minus 25 Celsius. And if you forget your gloves or lose your gloves, you're in real trouble. So that really gave me a great respect for nature, for the fact that humans cannot control nature, but nature control people, and a very big respect for this sort of factual realities. That was, I think, from my childhood on, that you have to live with the circumstances, and the circumstances don't adjust to you. That was one thing. Now, it's also an interesting city because it's now a UNESCO site for early watch industry. It's the capital of watch industry, early watch industry. So there was also, from this watch industry, there was some industrialists with quite a bit of money, and actually pushed that city to have very early nice theater, nice music hall, and actually very good, in which some recording was done. So I was also exposed to culture very early from that town that is small, but with a lot of culture. And a high school also was a sort of avant-garde high school, which was a bit different from other high schools. So this sort of influence of, on one end, a climate that was really, really harsh at the time, not less now, but very harsh. And at the same time, a lot of culture was one thing. So now, as far as my parents, actually, they were interesting people. They were both rebels in a way. So meaning that my mother was coming from a Seventh-day Adventist family, and she was the only one who left the religion very early. So she was a little bit isolated from her family. But my uncles and my cousin most lived as missionaries in faraway countries. So since a child, I heard about Madagascar, about North Africa, about Africa. And so I remember I had the zebra as the first toy and these kind of things, so that the big world was there very quickly, but also difficulties with religion. And my mother was a nurse and then a physical therapist, so medicine came a little bit from her. So my parents got divorced when I was only 6, and I was an only child. And see, I didn't. My father's sister was not married, so I was really not living in the big family context, like, for instance, was Ivan, who had the experience of extended family every Sunday in his life since he was a child. So I had a very different sort of life experience as a family, as an only child and divorced parents. But I had a lot of contact with my father, and I have not to talk a bit about him. He was also quite an unusual person. He was born in a farm in the mountains of Jura Mountains, also a very harsh condition. The farm was very simple. There was no given, sometimes we had to watch to save the water, not always electricity when there was a storm. And so again, there, the force of nature and also the force of animals. I was exposed to big animals like big bulls and horses as a child, and had to sort of move around these big animals and to find my way as to really be very aware of the might of these animals, but also to be in contact with them. And I think that came to my mind that when I work with people, while really difficult and or strange or psychotic or sort of violent impulses in youth, that somehow this sort of respect for them, that you have to respect their might, if I want to say that, but at the same time to make yourself as unintrusive as possible and sort of slowly merge in their space. something I got from that experience at the farm, which is really hard to convey, but I think I was working with a young Tibetan girl, and she lived with me for a few months. And she said the most she learned from America was from me, how to approach deers without making them go away. And so you approach a little bit, you make the self almost forgotten. Once they believe that you are part of this space, you move again. And that really became a resource in my work with teenagers. It's hard to explain it, but it became important. So now, as far as to not be intrusive, to not force the situation, to be patient, all these sort of elements. So now, as far as my father, I mean, it was very strange because he was born in this isolated farm, but as soon as a child, he developed talent for drawing, and his sister for playing music, and both became artists, which became very, very difficult for my grandparents, would not expect that. So my aunt left for Vienna at 20, and she stayed in Vienna studying piano for 9 years and had to come back because of World War I. But she was always with the head in Vienna, which also had an influence, and even Budapest. So they were talking about Budapest and Vienna and this sort of old world, and it somehow became familiar to me. So maybe that's a connection also with events past, you know. And then so my father had a harsh story because, so my aunt, she became a pianist, and she came back and worked as an organist and a piano teacher all her life, and she died very old, and she was like a second mother to me. And I liked her very much. She had never married, never had children. And my father had a harder life because in his 20s, he got encephalitis from economic encephalitis, which is a very strange disease, which is a sort of sleepy disease. So meaning he fell asleep automatically without control all his life, which was very difficult and hindered his life. And because he couldn't drive, he could not operate any kind of machines. But it allowed him to actually not take over the farm. He couldn't. So it was no more discussion that he could take over the farm. And he got to some farmers that out from another family that took over. But then he could work as an artist. And all his life he worked as an artist. He was very known. He has some statues in my hometown that are in parks and so on, animal statues, but not very successful financially as an artist. So life was not easy for him. And with this disease, I had also to learn to live with a father who had a serious handicap. It was kind of totally normal, and suddenly it's like Zoom would stop, he's gone, and then he comes back. So I think that also influenced me maybe in trying to help people who have some neurological disease or something, maybe. But also he was extremely strong in not getting himself beaten by his disease. And that, I think, gave me an inspiration to accept reality, that you cannot change the disease, but you can make the best out of it. And that, I think, also became a resource in my working with rather sick people. But the other influence also, that he was very interested in history and geography and archaeology, and that became something very important in my life. And in some ways, I thought that I should become an explorer since I was a child. But then maybe that also played an influence, that I was very open to people who were very different, who I do not understand, but I try to understand, I try to make bridges. And so I think that also played a role in my life. So now, as far as archaeology, I still pursue this. And actually, I was mentioning in sort of an introduction that I taught everywhere from Chile to Mongolia. And I went to Mongolia, first of all, for my archaeological interest, and by chance then was able to teach there elsewhere. But that was not the first reason of my trip. So now another element also, that very early I got interested in religion when my father was a very strong atheist. My aunt was a lifelong organist in a Calvinist church. My mother was a Seventh-day Adventist renegade. And in all of this mishmash, I ended up being as a friend who knows me very well would say, Buddhist light, like Coca light. I'm Buddhist, but not too strong. So that became also the reason of my traveling to India. And that was also very important that in 1977, I made a medical substitution as a doctor for the Tibetan refugee camp and worked with the Dalai Lama's sister. And I maintained contacts with Tibetan communities in that. It was in the late 70s. And when Ivan got sick with Parkinson's disease and needed a life aids, like assistant to live with us, and I could recruit young people in the Tibetan community. So he was surrounded by Tibetan young people for all the years when he was in the wheelchair. He was paralyzed with Parkinson for 7 years. He was in the wheelchair. And at that time, he was quite isolated and people didn't visit him much. And so this sort of Tibetan family became also very, very nice for him. And now I'm still an honorary Tibetan grandmother for the young people, not so young, and got married and had children. So they are now my honorary grandchildren. So that's another part of my life. So now back to my studies. So in that sort of interest for history and medicine from my mother, I was a bit confused. And at that time I was very young, and I was having a boyfriend who was in dental field. So based on this boyfriend, I decided I want to go to dental school, which was a very bad idea. So I started medicine. It's a joint program for 2 years. I did well in my medical studies, but then when I arrived at dental school, it was a bit of a disaster. And then I had a sort of a life crisis, what I do, and then decided, should I continue in medicine? I mean, redo the time I had missed and then stay in medicine, or should I go this time to history and etc. And I did both for 2 years. It was a bit crazy. So for 2 years, I had one foot in the medical school. I was only going to the labs. I was studying at home for the rest. I was not going to classes. And with that time that was free, I was going to classes in history and archaeology at the university also. And but I didn't graduate. It was a bachelor program, but I was not able to do all the classes that were needed for the bachelor program. So I finalized to stay in medicine. And at that time, I decided, now I really know what I want to do. I want to become a psychiatrist. So I got actually some psychiatric training already before I finished my medical degree. And then I also was still interested in history, and I specialized in history of psychotherapy and wrote my dissertation on a subject of history of psychotherapy, so the doctoral dissertation. And that I want to make a parenthesis about it as far as Ivan, because when I started to study contextual therapy and to teach it, I will come back to it, then I tried to organize his articles in a sequence that was historically logical. And I had a sort of, what do you say in French, polycopy, like when I copied this article for my students in that order. And then Ivan got very interested in this booklet or something, I mean, so more than a booklet. And that became the base of his writing of that foundation of contextual therapy, the collected papers. So I'm quoted in the book as a source of inspiration. And I still think it's a very, very good book. And that I also want to insist to people to read the introductory part that are in italic, that Ivan wrote as introduction or bridge between the different chapters. And I think just from reading this part, the italic part, which are very short, there's a few pages each, one can learn an awful lot about contextual therapy. So I really encourage people to look into this material. So now back, so I am a psychiatrist. I'm now trained in I get my medical diploma. And then I did 1 year of internal medicine, then went to India. At that time, I had a little bit hesitation. Should I go back to physical medicine to be helpful with Tibetans? And that I have to mention this also because it's very unusual. I can correctly say that I got professional orientation consultation from Dalai Lama. It's not a joke, meaning that I was confused. Should I stay in psychiatry? Should I go to regular medicine to be more helpful for the Tibetans? And the Dalai Lama's sister said, well, we have to ask His Holiness about it. So she organized an appointment, and he said, if I'm a young person who is determined to help people with mental illnesses, it's much more useful than being one more doctor who has studied pediatrics or tropical medicine, which there are plenty of people like that. So it gave me a sort of extra encouragement to stay in psychiatry. So I got my training in a special place in psychiatry, which is that there we worked by zip codes, if you can imagine that. So meaning, or postal codes. So each team was assigned to a number of postal codes. So we, from these areas came people with all sorts of different psychiatric problems, sometimes mild, sometimes very severe, sometimes same family, because obviously they live in the same place, so they have the same address. So we started to see families, but we had absolutely no background to figure out how to do that, because that was very, very new. I'm talking about the late 70s. So I got to work in the hospital, I got to work in outpatient, I got to work with families, but again, with not much directions, basically. So we all went to one of the very first conferences on family therapy in Zurich, 1978. And that's where I met Ivan the first time. I went to his seminar, I was registered for his seminar, but I don't think I even talked to him. I don't remember talking to him or anything. But I had this friend who was a lifelong friend, and I will mention about it, was a Tibetan scholar, one of the most known specialists of Tibetan Buddhism. And I remember writing to him, not talking to him, writing to him, I think I've found what I need. And I remember writing the letter, but I don't remember meeting Ivan, like talking to him. And what I meant by that as a Buddhist, I was interested in what is the nature of the self, And in Buddhism, you represent it as dialectic, as the self exists independence, or not independently, the opposite, independence on others. So not independent, not autonomy, but the self exists through relating. And that talk that he gave in Zurich was exactly about that. He was presenting the dialectic theory of the personality. He was presenting the notion of the autonomy is paradoxical, because autonomy is coming from relating. And also he started to talk about the ontic dependence. And that to me was a clue that here is an approach that is compatible with Buddhism, because of that very specific view of the self as in relation with others, not like the sort of self-focus on many, many psychological approaches, including psychoanalysis. So that was a very first step that led me to contextual therapy, which was really based on that. And you can now understand why I'm very attracted to teach about the dimension 5, about the ontic dimension, and still maintains a very strong interest for that, that part. And even in 2019, so 2 years ago, wrote an article on that subject with this friend whose name is Alex Berzin. And that also may be interesting for people to have a peek at it. So that was a first. Then I continue my work. And then suddenly came the notice that Ivan is coming to teach in a very early family therapy program that I was not yet admitted to. I was told that I was too young. I had to wait my turn. So I was not part of this institute in Lausanne, the CEF. But they had no case to present to Ivan. And so they called me in emergency to bring a family for him to interview. So it was a special introduction to Ivan that in no way I kind of saved the day. He was happy that there was a family finally. And we met, I was introduced. And one shock for me was that he wanted to write my name down. And when I told my name, he just wrote it down. And I said, do you not need to spell it? He said, no, I know it. I said, how? So well, my brother studied French in Neuchâtel in the Ducommun family. So when I was a teenager, I was writing to him, putting the address to this Claude Ducommun in Neuchâtel. So I know the Ducommun family. It was not direct relative of me, but very distant relative. So here is a second crazy connection. So the family I presented was very difficult, and this gave me a total clue about it. It was a conversion. It was a conversion from an individual model of thinking about why this young woman had problems. She had a problem acting as a mother. She was a good mother, but she always felt that she couldn't act as a mother. And that was the subject of therapy. And then we discovered through this consultation, so there was some interpretation that it had to do with a sort of Oedipus complex because her father had dated a woman her age, so that now she wanted to be a jealous daughter and not a competent wife and mother. But Ivan saw it very, very differently in connection with her own mother's depression, her guilt over having abandoned religion as a Jewish woman. She was a survivor of Holocaust who was saved because she moved to Switzerland and married there. So all of this came suddenly as a new explanation, and that to me was my conversion to contextual therapy. So then from then on, also Ivan realized that I was very good in English. So he asked me if I could translate for him when he was coming to Switzerland. And I did that. And then afterwards, for almost 20 years, I was his interpreter for English, French English in France and Switzerland and Belgium until he stopped teaching, basically. So now it doesn't tell us about the marriage, which is a separate story. So I went to Philadelphia to study, but as an independent, I took a sabbatical from my work to study in Philadelphia. So I was in the master program at Hahnemann University, but as a free student, I had no obligations. I didn't get any degree. I just took the classes I wanted, including some classes with Ivan, classes with Margaret Cotroneo, Barbara Krasner, but also I was free to move around and took classes with Carl Whitaker, who was in town at the time. So I went to his family interviews also. So it was a very, very rich, I think I was 9 months, 8 months, something, not a full year of a lot of getting to know many, many things and learning about contextual therapy very intensively, because I could merge the classes of the 2 years in 1 year, because I could attend any class I wanted. I didn't know obligatory courses. So I did almost a program in 1 year. And then I went back to Switzerland, and I was appointed as medical director of a hospital, child psychiatric hospital, and took the job. I was also a civil servant within the medical system, sort of high ranking for a very early age, first woman in that position. And everybody thought that this is my life until I retire. Well, that was not completely true, because after 5 years or something, then things changed with Ivan. And by that time, I knew him for almost 10 years, I guess. And then he asked me if I could come to Philadelphia. And then I came, and we got married in 1987. And then we were married for almost 20 years when he died in 2007. Just not missing a few months. So that's one big package that I've served at once. So I have to go back to you now.
Thank you very much for all this nice interpretation.